stating that something like 40% of millennials don't feel they have any control over their life.
Right.
So that is related to the first issue that you brought up. And you obviously consider that problematic. And you said that it's good for us to have some control over our destinies and also to feel that that's a possibility, to see it
Yes.
at least as a goal.
Yes.
And if we feel consciously thwarted in that goal or believe that it's impossible, that doesn't mean we're going to give up our striving. It means it's going to go underground, and then it's going to manifest itself in all sorts of deceptive ways.
Exactly.
And then you said that you were interested in Nietzsche's idea of will to power as, in some sense, the central motivation of the organism.
Yeah.
So, cross species to some degree. And then you talked about the jobs that you've had. So why so I got that right, I hope I've got that.
Yes, you did. That was very well put. Thank you.
Okay. And so to some degree, and then you said, well, you had all these jobs and you found that people were engaged in manipulative and deceptive strategies, a fair number of no one was really warning people about this or delineating out the strategies.
Yeah.
Okay, so that seems to me to be reasonable. I'm a big admirer of the work of Carl Jung, which everyone listening to this knows more than they even want to know. And he was certainly sensitive to the idea that people had a terrible shadow.
Yes.
That they would clothe themselves in the garments of moral virtue.
Right.
And act out a virtuous persona, but because of the thwarted will to strive in some sense, that they have all sorts of motivations, sexual, power-related, dominance, aggression, anger, resentment, that aren't admitted thoroughly and that are snakes under the carpet or elephants under the rug or skeletons in the closet, and they pollute human relationships. And I certainly believe that's true. I believe that's the corruption of human relationships by a form of severe deceit. And I also think it's reasonable to warn people against that and also to alert them to the fact that such things operate in their own souls.
My experience is, and what I wanted to help people with the 48 laws of power, when these things kind of happen, you get very confused and they create a kind of trauma in your life where you sometimes blame yourself or you wonder, maybe you did something wrong. And you become a little bit skittish. And you get a little bit afraid in your next job, and these things kind of linger on in your mind. So having some clarity, I don't want to make people paranoid in reading these books. I make it very clear that that's not the point. I want you to be very realistic. But the idea that you could have some clarity that maybe what really happened is that I inadvertently triggered the insecurities of this boss, or maybe there are these strict kind of moral puritanical codes in place, and I somehow violated them. It's not my fault. That kind of clarity can be very, very empowering, I find in that.
So is it possible, I don't want to push this interpretation beyond its reasonable limits, but I'm wondering, you're open and creative and entrepreneurial, and so that's not going to suit you for managerial or bureaucratic jobs.
No.
You don't have the temperament for that.
No.
And then you're agreeable. And so is it possible that you encountered more of that bullying behavior, or like a disproportionate amount of that bullying behavior and so forth in the jobs that you have? Is that?
I think that's very possible. And yes, and I'm also very sensitive, so I'm kind of, react a little bit more than most other people might react. But the odd thing is that the book came out in 1998, and it has resonated with lots and lots of readers. I've sold millions of copies of the book. And so I think a lot of people share the trait that I have.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. It's not uncommon what I'm talking about at all.
I mean, the great manipulators in the world, the 3% that you talk about, and I think that's about the right number, they don't need this kind of book because they're born that way, or they're not born that way, but they learned at the age of 3 or 4 or 5 how to begin to manipulate, and their whole personality was kind of formed over these sort of tactics. They don't need a book like that.
What seems to happen there, we studied that, so if you take 2-year-olds and you group them together, 2-year-olds, by the way, grouped together are the most violent of human beings in
definitely.
age-matched groups. Okay, so among 2-year-olds, there's a proportion of them who will spontaneously kick, fight, hit, bite, and steal.
Yeah.
Okay, they're almost all males, and it's about 5% of the males. Now, most of them this goes to nature versus nurture, say, most of them get socialized out of that by the time they're 4. Now, they would be more disagreeable boys. So they're not empathic and compassionate, polite by temperament, but they can still be socialized. But a proportion of them don't get socialized.
Right.
And they tend to be life course antisocial types.
Yeah, I think Melanie Klein, she looked at infants like that at that age, and she said that there was something called the greedy baby. And the greedy baby was like sucking the mother's breast so hard it could never get enough milk. It was just so greedy for more and more. And she saw that as the child got older, that kind of greediness and that kind of selfish behavior only got worse and worse and worse. And she would like try and see if you could track that to someone who became older. It was the type, and she ended up thinking that there was maybe a genetic component to this.
Yeah, well, there is a genetic component too, because that sort of proclivity runs in families. And also there's a genetic underpinning to variation in agreeableness. Now, if you have a tough kid like that, and you're very agreeable, the kid can run roughshod over you. It's very difficult for you to do the socialization.